Good morning. My name is Ed Drozda. Welcome to Business Share. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Peter Cotton. Peter is the president of Best Sales Talent. He has more than 38 years of experience in the executive search business. Peter conducts search, recruitment, and placement of sales, sales management, and marketing talent for his client companies. Good morning, Peter. How you doing?
Good morning. Fine, thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, Peter, the world of executive search is quite a large industry. I understand about $172 billion a year in the USA alone. But most of us aren't really quite sure about what this industry is all about. You've had some exposure, but I'd like you to give me an overview, if you would, of the different kinds of firms that exist in the industry and what makes them different.
Okay. Well, the industry is basically segmented into two sections. There's the temporary staffing world, and then there's the permanent placement world. The temporary world is firms that place people in light industrial, manufacturing, warehouse, telemarketing, customer service, construction, all types of jobs, where people are on a part-time contractual basis, working for the staffing firm, on the payroll of the staffing firm, but actually working elsewhere at a client location.
Okay.
The reason why they represent $136.5 billion of the industry is that the revenue that's reported is total wages billed to the client. So when a staffing firm places someone for an hour, they're not only billing for the hourly wage, but they're billing also for taxes, back office, general administrative costs, and a percent of profit. So thousands of workers are out there, and that's why their billings is so high. In the permanent placement world, there are contingency recruiters whose job is to go out and locate candidates to fill positions. They don't charge a fee to the client unless and until a person gets hired.
Okay.
They go through the entire process of developing a job description, researching where the candidates might be working, going out of the market and finding candidates to fill the job, presenting the opportunity to them, reference checking them, arranging interviews, working with the employer and the candidate throughout the entire interviewing process, hopefully to the point of an offer of a position and the acceptance by the candidate. And that's when the recruiter counsels the candidate on how to effectively resign from the job and start the new position. Again, they only get paid when a person actually begins employment.
Okay.
On the other end of the spectrum are the retained search firms. They are paid for a process, whether or not they actually place anyone in a position. They are true consultants. And sometimes they bill on a installment basis, 1/3 at the start of a search, 1/3 at 30, 1/3 at 60 days, or some variation to that.
Okay.
Or they are on an annual retainer basis. And they consult with the client about their human capital needs. They could even recommend that someone who's already in the company get promoted to that job, and that's considered the end of the search.
Okay.
So they're paid in installments. There's a hybrid of that, which is a marriage of the contingency search model and the retained search model, where firms charge an engagement fee, which shows a commitment on the part of the employer to work exclusively with that recruiter to fill the job. They do all the same work, and they get paid the balance of their fee at the time that a person goes to work. So that represents the $36 billion part of the industry.
May I ask you a question? There's also, I recall, there are instances where an individual versus a company would work with a recruiter. Is that yet another version of this? Because you've talked about those who are client-based, or the client being the company, but where the individual is being represented. Is that also still a viable form?
True search is not marketing candidates. True search is working for a company. That's their first and foremost responsibility,
okay,
to fill their needs. There are times when a candidate might call a recruiter they know, and conversation gets rolling, and before they know it, the recruiter is introducing them to something.
I see.
But it's not typically the way.
So they're not one and the same, really. It's a different avenue that might lead to the traditional recruitment role, but not.
Right.
But not.
Right.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So how about that term headhunter? It sounds rather primitive, And, well, it is somewhat primitive, I suppose. And if we had shrunken heads to put out here, I'm sure we would, just to kind of give us a little feel for what's going on. But what does it mean in today's world, and what's the difference between a recruiter and an employment counselor?
Well, the moniker headhunter comes from the jungle warriors who would seek out their enemy, hunt them down, kill them, and behead them, and put their heads on sticks. Now, modern day recruiters don't kill anyone, but we do hunt down highly qualified candidates. We recruit them and we place them at our client companies.
Which is the equivalent of putting the head on the stick. So
Sort of. The term counselor really came about post-World War II, when there was a large economic boom going on in the United States. People were coming home from the military, companies were expanding, no longer focused on a war effort, they were focused on a peacetime economy. And when an employer would run an ad, and in those days the only way to do it was a newspaper ad, they would find that they had thousands of people lined out in front of their door, or they had tons of mail coming in with resumes.
Okay.
It became impossible for them to handle it. So they went to employment agencies and asked them to handle the job and to fill it. So candidates would look at a newspaper ad, it would be by an employment agent. They'd go to the agent, and the agent was a counselor who would counsel them on what the jobs that were available might be as a fit for them and their needs. In those days, the business model was called APF, applicant paid fee, where the candidate paid a percentage of their salary, of their wages, in order to get a job for one of these, with one of these companies.
Ah, okay.
The term counselor started to dissipate and started to change because in the middle 60s, a company by the name of Management Recruiters International pioneered a new business model, which was called employer paid fee, EPF, and they convinced companies that the best way to get the best people was that they should pay the fee to acquire the talent. So the EPF model has been followed by every recruiting firm in the world. No longer do candidates pay a fee to obtain a position. That's the major difference between what a counselor is in the old days, if you will, and what the new business model is today.
And today's recruiter, however, is also a counselor, I take it, because they are nurturing, culturing, and cultivating those characteristics that a potential prospect has, and helping them to attain a position. If they're a viable candidate, they're trying to nurture them into that position. Is that not correct, or?
Well, a recruiter is many things to many people. It's a mentor, an advisor, a friend, a counselor, as you use the term. It's someone to complain to cry on their shoulder,
Right.
to ask for advice and counsel. A recruiter does a lot of things, but it's not just to candidates that they do that. They do that for employers as well.
The employer, right.
So we are in a very intense, highly personal business where we are involved in in-depth conversations with people about their issues, their concerns, their aspirations career-wise, the company's goals and objectives. We get to know an awful lot about what's going on between candidates and employers.
Okay, excellent. So let's say I have a job, I'm quite happy. Out of the blue, I get a call from a recruiter. Why am I getting calls like this, and what should I do when I receive such a call?
Well, first of all, let's look at the talent pool, if we could. The talent pool is comprised of two major segments: the active job-seeking candidates and the passive candidates. Active candidates account for about 20% of the workforce. These are people who are either out of work, who need a job, who are unhappy in their present job, who have to find a new job because of some change in their life status. Perhaps a husband or wife got transferred, they have to find a new job. Any number of things causing them to have to look for employment. They are spending all of their time and their energy looking for a new job, which includes networking and calling friends and reading want ads and going on the internet and looking at job postings and clicking as they apply to jobs.
Okay.
The world of a recruiter is to work with what we call the deep end of the talent pool. That's the 80% of passive candidates. These are people who are happy, productive, thought well of where they're at. They're not looking for a better opportunity. They're unaware of what might be a better opportunity because they don't have the mindset that the grass must be greener someplace else.
Okay.
They don't have a resume prepared. They're not reading want ads. They're not going on the internet. They're not actively looking for a job. It's the recruiter's job to find those people. Now, your question was, what happens when a call comes in like that?
Right.
Well, first of all, a professional recruiter is not going to immediately launch into a sales presentation on the job that they seek to fill. What they want to do is to develop a conversation with give and take so the candidate feels comfortable in talking to them and wants to establish credibility as in terms of what the recruiter is doing. We listen to the candidates, we don't just talk. But at one point in the conversation, the recruiter will say to them, would you be interested in possibly exploring what could be a better opportunity than what you now have? And then we listen. There's two obvious answers. No would mean that we would say, why not? What is it about your current employment status that would cause you not to look for, excuse me, not to look for another job? We might hear, well, I just got promoted, or I'm going to get promoted, or I just got a raise, or any number of things causing them to not look today. If they say yes, then we would immediately ask, why is now a better time to look at a new position than at any other time in your career? And that's when we start to gather information about that candidate's wants, desires, aspirations, what they would like in a new job, what kind of a company they would want to go to work for. We find out a lot of information about that person. That's where that counselor role comes in, if you will.
Okay.
We listen. Okay. If we have a position that is a fit for that candidate, then we would start to talk about the position, the company, the products or services, the hiring manager's personality, the company culture, the features of the job, the challenges of the job, the things that might be difficult for the person to be faced with. We discuss compensation and benefits, everything, so that the candidate can make a determination as to whether or not it's something that they want to go forward with. And if they do, we start walking them through a process, and we explain what that process is going to be like, what the interviews are going to look like, how many, who are they going to meet with, where are the interviews, when are the interviews.
Okay.
And we work with them all the way up through and including offer and acceptance, resignation of their current job, and starting a new position.
So you mentioned that they're reaching out for the deep end of the applicant pool.
Candidate
And-
pool. Candidate. That's
Candidate
different
pool,
than
I'm sorry,
applicant.
not applicant, that's my apologies. The candidate pool. So I take it that what they're looking to do is to build, the recruiter, to build their own portfolio of potential candidates for their clients. Is that
Well, that
correct?
happens by just the mere act of going out in the marketplace and talking to people.
Right.
But you got to understand that the employer's mindset is, we want to find the best talent.
Mm-hmm.
And typically the best talent is currently employed. As I mentioned, they're happy, productive, thought well of. They're probably top performers in their companies.
Right.
Or at least in the top quarter.
Okay.
The employer mindset sometimes is, if they're out of work, there's something wrong. If they're
Okay.
out of work for a long period of time, there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to look down their noses, if you will, at people in the 20 percentile,
Right.
and they feel better about talking to candidates in the 80 percentile. But
Okay.
they cannot find them. Now, I'm going to talk about this perhaps in a few moments, but
Okay.
when employers post a job, they're hoping to find somebody in that 80 percentile group. But I just said, the 80 percentiles, they're not looking for jobs.
Right.
The people who are applying are coming from the 20% of the group, the active candidates. So here's an employer who wants to hit this target, but what they're getting is a completely different group of people. That's why they need a recruiter.
Okay, so let's elaborate on that. I'm an employer. I am looking for a person or persons to fill a position or positions. How do I go about, when should I use the services of a recruiter?
You should use a recruiter when it's a very difficult job to fill, when you either don't know how or are unable or can't fill the job on your own, and when there's a sense of urgency about filling it. And when I say a sense of urgency, since I deal in sales, I'll use that as an example. If a sales territory is open for a period of time, pretty soon competition is going to know about it, and the competition is going to start knocking on the doors of that particular client's customers.
Okay.
They're going to try to acquire those customers. For every day the territory is vacant, new business isn't being acquired. There's lost business opportunities there. So there's a cost that can be attributed to that open territory. But that's true of any job. If an accountant's role is not filled, there's a cost to that.
Right.
If a manufacturing manager's position is not filled, there's a cost to that.
Mm-hmm.
If you can put a sense of urgency on it, then that's the time to use a recruiter. I might add that it's counterintuitive. A lot of employers think, well, I'll call 10 recruiters and I'll increase my odds of hiring someone. That couldn't be further from the truth. A smart recruiter is going to know, either through asking questions of the employer or finding out in the marketplace, that the employer is using 10 recruiters to fill one job. So he thinks, well, I got a 10% chance of filling this position.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather spend their time with a client who respects their services, where they have a 100% chance of filling the position.
Okay.
So when recruiters find out there's a whole bunch of people working on it, they tend not to spend a lot of time with it, or they don't spend any time on it at all. Example, a company wouldn't call 10 accounting firms and ask all of them to do their tax returns simultaneously and then say, we will pay the first person to finish and or the first one who gives us a tax return that says we don't have to pay too much. So it's the same thing with recruiters. You need
Right.
to respect them.
Right. So for the employer, the employer's role in the recruiter-employer relationship, tell me more about that. How does the employer, now obviously the employer has identified the need, they make the contact with the recruitment firm, the engagement begins, but what is their ongoing responsibility? What is their relationship with the recruiter as time goes on?
Well, the employer has to be cooperative. All we're asking for is mutual cooperation and respect, basically, from either a candidate or an employer. So the employer has to make themselves available for phone calls from the recruiter with questions that happen during the search process. They have to be available to interview. They have to give, in many instances, preset times for interviews so that we have a schedule to work with, and we know that when we find candidates, we can tell them we have an interview set for you on Wednesday or the following Monday or whatever. We just need a lot of interaction. We need communication.
Mm-hmm.
We can't conduct an effective search if an employer won't take phone calls, doesn't want to participate in the process.
Okay. And I presume that there's a certain amount of information expected from the employer, not only who they're looking for, but more in-depth information about the sorts of qualities, characteristics, and such.
We get more information from them than they are even aware that they had in order to present the opportunity properly to a candidate. It's not just a job description. We get much more information than that. We want to know about the culture. We want to know about the track record of the manager. Many times, candidates will switch jobs just to go to work for a person, let alone the name of the company or what they do, because that person is on a track for future stardom, if you will, and they want to hook their wagon to that person.
It almost sounds like the recruitment is advantageous to the employer, not only because of the ability to find qualified talent, but probably to also take a good look at their own operations and how they might improve things. If they're going through this process of identifying the culture and so on and so forth, if you're asking the right questions, you're giving them an opportunity to
That's true.
potentially identify some errors, areas for improvement.
That's true.
And opportunity to change.
In reality, recruiters are in the business of solving problems. The problem is that they have a need for a particular type of person. But we're also in what we call the time circumvention business.
Mm-hmm.
We can save an employer an enormous amount of time, and time is money. So instead of them trying to do it themselves, and sometimes they think they can do it themselves and it's going to cost less than a recruiter fee,
Right.
It actually costs them more in soft dollars and people who aren't doing their regular job who are asked to do the recruitment process.
Right.
So we're saving a lot of people time in the process.
No, it's perhaps an unexpected benefit Not necessarily the obvious one, but it's kind of intriguing to me because I've always thought of recruitment as being simply that, bringing people on board. Never saw another angle to it. So I appreciate that insight. With the internet, the proliferation of job boards and social media websites such as LinkedIn, is the profession of recruiting dying, morphing, being assimilated? What's going on? What's the impact?
It's actually improving.
Okay.
Much to the contrary thinking of many people. When the internet came about and someone invented the first job board, everyone thought this is going to be remarkable. We're going to post a job and we're going to get thousands of people respond and we'll have many, many choices. If you look at a graph that I've prepared for you, it shows that only 5% of all hires are made through the internet in comparison to 16% by recruiters, which is a little bit more than 3 times as many. But there's something that most people don't understand about the internet. First of all, there are thousands of job boards today. Some are very niched. They only work in a particular industry. Many are what we call monster job boards that work all occupations.
Right.
They sell these services to employers of a giant resume database that can be accessed for a fee and postings, pay per posting. So employers think, well, this is great. I'll post a job. I got millions of resumes that will automatically be funneled to my job or I can go and look at.
Right.
What they forget is that a database is obsolete the moment it's created.
True.
The resumes are not always up to date.
Right.
Candidates change jobs, they die, they get transferred, women get married, change their last names, can't be found, they get promoted, they're off the market. All kinds of things are constantly changing for all these people. So the database is not as great as it's made out to be. They sell candidates on the idea that we have all these jobs that you can look at and apply to. And unfortunately, candidates get lulled into a false sense of security, clicking their mouse, submitting their resumes, thinking, I'm busy, I'm active, I'm accomplishing something. But what they don't see under the surface of that is a real problem. And the problem is this. There are only so many people who can look at these resumes. If a company has one job to fill and they get 100 or 200 resumes,
Right.
that takes time. Imagine a company who's got 5 to 10 to 100 openings. Many companies have that many. They're getting thousands and thousands of resumes. People can't handle the volume. Moreover, the job is typically assigned to someone low down in the totem pole, so to speak, who may not be so skilled at reading resumes and determining if it's a match to a particular job. So along comes these software companies that said, we have a solution to this problem. It's called applicant tracking systems. And we'll create a software program that will look at the resumes and determine if they're a match to those jobs. Unfortunately, these things don't work very well. Read an article recently where someone experimented with that, and they took a job and they invented a fictitious candidate who matched every point of that job. Everything the job was looking for, that candidate possessed.
Right.
They submitted the candidate. Candidate wasn't selected for an interview. In fact, 48% of qualified candidates going through these systems are not selected. So we have candidates applying to jobs, the active candidates applying to these jobs. We have employers trying to find the 80% group, but the only ones who are applying are the 20% group. So we've got employers and candidates missing one another.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So the applicant tracking systems really aren't helping too much. And what now occurs is the employers are fed up, they're exasperated, they're frustrated, and they now realize, I've got an urgent need to fill. I'm not able to do it myself the way I thought. I've spent a lot of time and money to do it myself. What I really need is a recruiter. What computers cannot do is replace that intense interpersonal interaction between a recruiter and a candidate.
Right.
A computer can't ask a candidate in-depth questions and find out about that person's emotional makeup. It's just impossible. So if
Or
we look
impart a
at,
gut feeling, for that matter, which is very important too.
sure. If we look at the other sources of hires, in those little three sections, career fairs, classified ads, direct mail, they're insignificant. They really don't account for much. The big piece there is the 72% of hires made through networking and other sources. Now, other sources could be the president hired his grandson, or he hired a neighbor or a cousin of some
Right.
sort, or an employee is paid a $1,000 bonus for bringing someone on board who they know.
Right.
That's a source of hire.
Okay.
But within that 72% is a number that's very, very hard to track, but it's real. And it is that people who are smart, who are passive candidates and or networking active candidates, will network with a recruiter. If you're called by a recruiter, it's not wise to hang up. It's better to establish a relationship because you might need them later on in life.
Yeah, it's true.
So frequently what happens is a candidate may not be active on the market, but they'll remember that they had a good conversation with a recruiter who works their industry. They'll call that person up and say, look, I'm not really unhappy where I am right now,
I hear you. Okay.
but I have to look at my future. I'm examining where I want to be in my
Right.
life and in my career. If you ever hear of something, please let me know. That now falls into that 16 percentile. If we were to take those types of people out of the 72% and put them over into the recruiter pie, if you will, that number would grow exponentially. It's probably more like 30% of hires are made through recruiters.
Interesting. And of course, the recruiter, as with the networking, is a personal relationship, and I think that's probably the important part. You're taking out the ambiguity of the virtual world, and we're having this here and now conversation, which is actually going to lead to a productive outcome. I totally appreciate that. So the current employment market, what's it like, and what suggestions do you have for people who are out of work looking for a job? I know recruiters can help them, but just talk about the whole picture, if you will.
Well, first of all, as we know, bad news sells newspapers. So whenever an unemployment statistic comes out, people perceive it as bad. So if it's a 5% unemployment rate, people might think, well, that's a lot of people out of work. But on the other side of the coin is 95% of the workforce is currently working. Now, I only deal in the professional and managerial area.
Right.
You remember the financial crisis we had, and there were a lot of people who were displaced. That group, college graduates, white-collar, professional, managerial, just after that financial crisis, the highest unemployment at the time was 4.5%. It's been trending downward since 2009, 2010, and it's currently 2.4%. So really, what we see out of that is a candidate-driven market. There are many jobs to fill. There's a scarcity of qualified people to fill those jobs. They are in that 80% group, the passive candidates. Now, people who are out of work, sure, you can use the internet, but the odds of getting hired through an employer job board or one of these aggregators like Indeed or one of the giant job boards like Monster or Career Builder is very small, because you are virtually a snowflake in an electronic blizzard of resumes. You know, if I were to put you down on the football field at Patriot Stadium with 5 other people, I'd be able to find you and pick you out. But if I took all the people out of their seats and put them down in the field, you'd be pretty hard to find. So that's pretty much what's going on with the job market.
Okay.
I can't speak to all types of employment and all types of unemployment. What I can tell you is that the best way to find a job is to get on the phone, see people in person, network, make things happen. Not to be passive by clicking and waiting for someone to contact you,
Right.
but by being actively engaged and going out to find a job. Call a company and make a presentation on something that you can do for them. Maybe you can help them solve problems.
Excellent. Finally, I have one more question for you, where our time is winding down. What are the challenges facing employers today, and what can a recruiter do to help them?
The biggest challenge facing employers today is that business is growing and the birth rate is declining. If we were to look at some stats, the baby boomers came about after what we called the silent majority. The silent majority from 1928 to 1946 represented about 47 million people. The baby boomer era from 46 to 65 was 76 million people. So that was an increase in the birth rate of 29 million people. Since baby boomers, we had Generation X, but that's only a 55,000 birth rate. So that's down 21 million from the baby boomer era. The millennials spiked up a little bit, 66 million births. It's up 11 from Generation X, but it's still down 10 million from the baby boomer era. The post-millennials, which covers the period of 98 to 2012, is 61 million. So the net effect is that we're down 15 million births since the baby boomer era. Now, in 2012, there were 146 million people working in all types of occupations. By 2022, which is just 7 years from now, they expect there to be 161 million jobs. If you look at that difference, that's 15 million. So we're going to have a gap between the available jobs to fill, all the jobs to fill, and the number of people to fill them. We're going to be 15 million people short.
Okay.
So the problem for the employer is, how do we find qualified candidates? And the way that's going to happen is not necessarily through the internet, it's going to happen through a recruiter.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you, Peter Cotton, President of Best Sales Talent, with 38 years experience in the executive search business. I appreciate having you here today and telling us about the recruitment industry and the challenges facing employers and those looking to be employed today. My name is Ed Drozda, the Small Business Doctor, and I thank you for joining us at Business Share. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Ed.